Welcome to the Mental Dietitian Podcast. I'm your host, Ahren Lynch-potter. Today's guest has been a coach for over 10 years. He works with people who are usually in the corporate world, helps them with mindfulness, and really developing a deeper relationship with oneself, especially in this crazy, fast-paced world that we live in. A lot of us need to slow down. Welcome to the show, Troy McFadden. It's amazing to have you here. Welcome to the Mental Dietitian.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, truly.
Yes, and we were kind of already chatting before we got started, but for those of you who don't know you, and that's pretty much most people, and I look forward to them knowing you and then connecting to you if they resonate with you. Tell us a little story about you, if you can, in five. Can you sum your life up in 5 minutes up to this point? Have the best shot at it. I'm looking forward to this. Troy.
Ooh, thank you. What an invitation. Well, I would say overall, born into difficult circumstances. And for the first 17 years of my life, there was a large black cloud that blocked most of the light. That is the overall broad stroke assessment. Poverty, neglect, abuse, violence, criminality, addiction, you name it, it was all part of my reality. Oh, it's so nice to laugh about it now. What suffering and yet what learning came out of that? What I was not exposed to, what I did not experience, I learned. You don't have kindness, how can you find kindness within yourself? You don't experience compassion, how do you find it? And how do you express it? So it couldn't have been a better teacher. And subsequently, I've lived a life of enormous freedom, external freedom and increasing internal freedom. I've had what I will call the privilege, the privilege. I think that's a combination of privilege and pleasure. A new word.
It's a good word.
I have traveled the world many times, pretty much constantly since then, had all kinds of adventures, connected with all kinds of people, have lived a very unconventional life in most respects, one full of joy and delight and beauty and love and sharing and connection. That is less than 5 minutes, but I think that's all I need.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Are you American? What part of the world are you from?
I am American. I was born in California, in the Bay Area of California, a little more specifically the San Jose area, so south of San Francisco. Cool. And then I grew up around the inland Northwest and the coast, the West Coast.
Cool. You said the first 17 years of your life was full of trials and tribulations. Looking back on it, because I one of my favorite sayings at the moment that I use with my clients that I absolutely love, and as like your first minute you said it, is that what suffering is pain divorced from meaning. So as soon as we find meaning to our pain, there's no more suffering, and that's why you could laugh about it. And maybe somebody listening to that might be like, why is he laughing? Like, what kind of psychopath is laughing at that? But I've met men personally that were sexually abused as children and were grateful for their rapists because of how much deep inner healing that they had done, which might sound absolutely insane to somebody listening to this right now, but it is possible. So what was going on at that time for you and your formative years, and basically how it shaped you? And yeah, I'd love to explore that with you.
Sure. So are you asking for some of the details, some of the specifics
just like
regarding my life?
Maybe like, was it a parental thing? Was your father around? Was your mom around? Like, why do you think, looking back on it, there was all that stuff going on? And how did you find meaning from it?
Well, I'll start vague again, or abstract at least. Yes, it was all happening ultimately because that is one way that life, the universe, the spirit teaches us. We can also learn by fierce love, powerful love. That's a beautiful way to learn, a much more for the most part. And again, to use that term again, for the most part, we learn via suffering. Yes, my parents were factors in it, and then the larger environment that I found myself in, extended family relations, etc. Um, poverty, if I didn't mention that before, was
Yeah.
also a factor.
Yeah. Yeah. What happened at 17? You said the first 17 years of your life. What happened at 17?
At 17, my father kicked me out of the house, which I was thrilled about. Secretly, but barely veiled delight. And from then, I was free, much more free. Then life was mine. I moved in with some people I worked with at a restaurant, and I started making life my own. I didn't have this imposing, overbearing, very unpleasant, negative energy around me anymore, and I could start finding my own way, having my own relationships. It was a bit of a death and rebirth process, really, looking back, with the emphasis in this case on the rebirth, expanding into the world.
Yeah. It's like your dad unintentionally gave you like a rite of passage to be a man, that just by kicking you out of the house. Like, here you go. There you go. I mean, it's not pleasant, but you said you were free for the first time. Like, yeah, that's beautiful. I I just imagine a scared 17-year-old kid in the first couple of weeks being terrifying. And then after that, being like, I can have cereal for dinner if I want. Like, look at this.
Great example.
Yeah. That's my story. I remember moving out of home, and this one time I just had cereal for dinner. I was like, all right, okay. I mean, I'm not going to do this long term, but I can do this and nobody's going to say a thing. I'm my own man. Like, look at this. What happened after that? Like, where did your life go from there? Like in your 20s, what were you doing as a career, and how did that eventually lead into coaching other humans?
Yeah, great question. Well, it's been a while. I'm 56, so sometimes I have to pause and yeah, take a moment to flip back through. Um, well, my early 20s involved, yes, again, a lot of exploration. I went to community college for a couple of years, worked, 3 jobs trying to cobble it together. And then I'm like, look, what am I doing? I'm not going to school to be an engineer or anything. I quite enjoyed that aspect of school. I don't think I'd ever enjoyed school as much, although I did like academics because it was an escape in part, and I had an inclination towards it, earlier on. Um, but yeah, something kind of formative when I was, I guess, 19. I sort of quit school, as it were. A friend of mine who was going to another university, and later a third friend bought a little truck, a little pickup, and put this old oversized camper on it. And we just took off traveling around the Western United States for a few months with a big bag of marijuana and a big bag of mushrooms and a sheet of acid. And I remember about 1 or 2 months into the trip, we ran out of all of them.
Yeah, but holy moly, you would have crossed a few different dimensions. You would have met God, the universe, a few times in that 3 or 4 months. You would have realized that time is an illusion. All kinds of things.
Sure,
Holy
with
moly.
wonderful backdrops, with these magnificent, stunning backdrops, national parks, and all that kind of thing.
That sounds amazing. Like basically going with your best buddies to some of the most beautiful parts of the United States and exploring your consciousness together. That's
That's
pretty cool.
that's exactly what it was. Yeah, well put, well
That's
said.
really, really cool. Yeah, that sounds.
And,
Yeah, I would do that now if somebody invited me.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, like, um,
me too.
yeah, yeah, that sounds like I'm like cool. Like, how do you get a camper van? Like, how do you do that? Do you
I
think
think it's a
that?
lot more expensive now. Pardon me.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. Some of these campers are. Some of the crazy ones are like I've seen $100,000, $200,000 ones, but it's like a luxury apartment on wheels. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you think, looking back on that few months and the expansion that would have occurred in your consciousness at quite a young age, what kind of impact do you think that had on you? Just that 2 month period and deep amount and big amounts of psychedelics that obviously I've explored, you've obviously explored. How do you think that changed you?
Well, it really flung the doors of possibility wide open unexpectedly. That wasn't necessarily the plan. But yeah, looking back, it sort of reinforced certain mindsets, less limited ones. What was possible externally, what else was out there in the world, a little more specifically, finding people who have also had maybe difficult and or unconventional lives. And here we are, as we've probably always been for the most part through human history, the minorities and little groups and little bands doing our thing. So yeah, it really opened up the world to me in an outward sense, and then of course inwardly as well. So subsequently, it was hard to take conventional consensus reality as seriously because one sees the absurdity of it, the excesses, the imbalances, just what we've done with the place essentially as humans.
Yeah.
I couldn't fool myself as easily. So then going forward, I resonated with those aspects of life, deeply connected with nature, into freedom and novelty and newness. And yeah, again, the lacking the restrictions that come with institutionalization and other forms of restriction, I would
Yeah.
say.
Mental restriction that has been put on us for a very long time that a lot of people seem to be waking up to, especially over the last 4 to 5 years, because it's just a little silly. If you just stop for a second and you just look at it, you're like, okay. I mean, I talk about anything, but I remember seeing during the pandemic, they were advertising that you could get a burger and fries with your vaccination. Which, if you just think about it, it's like, okay, well, burger and fries probably isn't the best for you. So you're giving me something that isn't, the reward is something that is not good for my health. The consensus is out at the time whether or not that the vaccinations were good for our health, and then it's just any person that's really connected to their heart is probably looking at something like that and be like, no, like no, the burger and fries, like that's a bit weird. I don't want to eat burger and fries. Maybe if it was a delicious poke bowl or something like that, something a bit healthier. But yeah, so it sounds like you got connected and you kind of saw the absurdity of institutions, maybe the go to school, get a job, with your good job, go get a degree, then get your 2.5 kids in a house with a mortgage and pay it off over 30, 40 years. And that's your life, Troy. There you go. Like,
Well,
yeah.
in fairness to myself, I never bought into that. It always seemed absurd. And it's not
Yeah.
because I, came into the world enlightened or anything. I mean, clearly not. I had difficult things to go through. One could argue, kind of as an aside, that I was ready for it. I was ready to handle such a thing. Such a thing would not overwhelm, but rather ultimately propel me upwards in my spiral. But that always seemed absurd to me. And again, it wasn't due to some enlightened perspective, but more from being on the outside looking in. Any of the other isms rather have benefited us, but it serves an increasingly small amount of people in increasingly excessive ways, and it causes separation and suffering for most people. Not as a theory, not as a concept, but in practice. Just like communism is a great idea, let's all share everything, but in practice, it hasn't proven to be effective.
Exactly.
So I was never going to buy into it because I didn't come from wealth. I didn't come from privilege. The bar was set very low. And it was like, why am I going to buy into this? Why am I going to enslave myself to a system that is just that, slavery, rather than serving the evolution and freedom of humanity?
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I could talk about a lot to do with that, but I'd love to. Yeah. It just, my brain is going all over the place right now. I'm like, which way could I go with that? But I'd love to stay on the topic of you and what were you doing as a career in your 20s and 30s? Like, what were you doing to make an income at the time?
Well, in my 20s, a lot of kind of, I guess, subsistence living, the default professions, as I call them, waiting
Yeah.
tables. I'm actually, I worked at a music store at some point in my sort of late 20s when I was going to college, lots of odd jobs, that kind of thing. Certainly plenty of manual labor. Um, it seems like there might be something more notable in there, but again, not on a career trajectory, right? Didn't I was in and out of college. I probably ended up going for a total of 4 years, but for various reasons, I didn't finish. And one of them is again, I'm like, I thought this was about seeking truth, but really it's just conditioning us, for the most part, it's conditioning us to be good workers,
Yep.
just slightly more educated workers than many. Um, but it did serve several purposes, and one of them was to expose me to greater culture. I mean, at some point, I went to the University of Florida, so all the way across the country, new people, a lot of people, and it's like there's a big world out there, and that's what's interesting to me, just to go and explore it. In part because I had so little chance to open to it, so never really tuned into anything career wise or anything else. And then in my late 20s, um, a friend of mine rolled up in a brand new vehicle, and he was going to take a few months to hit all the ski resorts of the Western US, and he had made a bunch of money growing pot.
Nice.
And I'm like, ah,
Hmm.
so for a good decade plus, that was my reality. That was my income. That brought me to a new level of affluence, a lot of risk, a
Oh
lot
yeah,
of
it was
adventure.
illegal back then. Very.
Oh, yes. Let's not bypass that point. Very
Yeah.
much so.
Yeah.
So then I essentially became even more of an outlaw. Like
Oh yeah.
one could use that term in a general sense prior, but then I literally was.
Cool. I had my share of selling, and I sold steroids, I sold cocaine, I sold MDMA, ecstasy, marijuana. The reason why I did, looking back on it, because it's very similar. I'm like, if I could sell this to somebody, say if it's marijuana, and I don't see harm in it, and people use it for whatever they want to use it for. Some people probably use it because they're avoiding things, which is a lot of people. But it's better than drinking, in my opinion. It really was. And if I can make $250 by just dropping off something to somebody in 10 minutes, or I could work 10 hours at $25 an hour. You know what I mean? Like I would still work at the time when I was exploring that, but it sounds like you were like heavily into it. Like you built it like a you had levels of affluence. You were probably moving large numbers of it back in probably what, the 90s?
Right, right, the 90s. I was never moving large numbers, although through time the numbers increased.
Yeah.
But as I've often described it, I was just a middle class drug dealer.
Nice.
I was making 40, 50, I don't know, maybe upwards of $80,000 a year, maybe,
Yeah.
and living fairly inexpensively, as a single guy traveling to developing nations through part of that time. So more than enough for me, especially, a poor boy like me.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, it was a total lifestyle. Like
Cool.
if you're smart about it, you have, you have a day job, you have a front, you're
Yeah.
out there mowing the lawn on Saturday morning, waving to the other guys doing the same or something, with your grow room in the basement or whatever. I was like, just, yeah, living outside the law and in lifestyle, and not, not intentionally flaunting it, for the most part, although at times I did, but like, yeah, like pretty much, thumbing my nose at the man.
Yeah. And you kind of, a lot of people like this terminology lately, but like you kind of broke out of the matrix a little bit and you saw like, hey, and you're not, it's not, yeah, like you're not buying Ferraris. You're just a self-employed entrepreneur that is doing what they want to do and selling a plant that makes people happy and relaxed. And yeah, I mean, obviously times have changed since then where I know people that are legal weed growers. I live in BC, Canada, which is the home of very good quality marijuana that is known around the world because of the growing conditions, because of the forest here, the temperate rainforest, and all the soil. But yeah, it's like I I think that's a really cool 10 years. Why what happened after 10 years? Why did that end?
That's a bit of an estimate, and it didn't have a hard stop. Although I got married,
Yeah.
uh, and my wife was from a much more conservative background, and it just didn't sit well with her. Plus, I didn't want to be taking the risks. I don't want to drag her or anyone into it. So it paused for a while, and then it kicked up again after the short marriage ended. Um, but then ultimately, yeah, uh, it just the industry, the business started to change. Suddenly, I was involved with people who weren't just my friends, who were, like, it started like me kind of living a back to the lander lifestyle and me just helping out my neighbors because I know that side of the equation is difficult. And then it became more abstract and new people, and I don't know you really, and I don't necessarily trust you, and just more sketchy and edgy and close calls. I'm like, okay, okay. Plus, I'm getting older. I'm like, no, 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 no.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as soon as it breaks out of that tight knit kind of group of people, because you sounded like you were doing it, I imagine like a community, almost like a hippie community that's just small and having a nice time. But then you get people that maybe are actual criminals, like violence and that's I've met people like that. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was involved in that. I met people that I was like, my nervous system instantly was like, get the fuck away from this human being. This person, like, no, no. And finding out that they're involved in murders afterwards, and like, yeah, it can be an icky world, a very icky world. Um, yeah. So that was how old were you when that kind of like transitioned out? Like, and I know that you're living in northern Thailand right now, so I'm imagining that were you like late 30s when you started kind of looking for something else? Like what did you do in your 40s between like 40 and 56 now?
Yes, yes. Very accurately assessed, by the way. Throughout this call, you have the timing down better than I. When you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been the age or the time period. Um, so yeah, it was a bit intermittent. I would sometimes travel and then I would go back and like do a run, like
Yep,
bring a great deal of weight a long distance and
yep.
make a little wad and then go live off of it. But it became again less attractive, less successful, all of that. So there was a point there where, yeah, I started a small business in Thailand. Um, this might seem paradoxical or ironic to some, but a healing center, because that was also an interest, cleansing and fasting and body work and that kind of thing.
Cool.
Um, and that segued into a couple of other things. I had a go at acting for a while.
I
Um,
saw that. I saw
acted
your
in,
IMDb on Google.
oh,
Yeah, I saw it. I was Googling you. I was having a look. I was like, oh, cool. Look at this.
just an adventure. I
Yeah.
didn't go looking for it, or at least consciously. It kind of came to me. I gave it a whirl. Very difficult. Talk about icky and sticky realities. It makes it makes drug dealing look angelic. The movie industry is full of just there's some lovely people, but for the most part, there's a lot of really nasty people and yucky stuff. And I was on the outer fringes of it, never
Yeah.
more than that, the F list. Um, so yeah, I mean, I wanted it to work. I really tried hard, but it was just like, oh man, this is just, it's like winning the lottery, if something takes. And then at some point, an opportunity came for my partner, now my wife, and I at the time to run a yoga teacher training business and a yoga events business. And so we did that for 10 years.
Was that in
Um,
Thailand or was that in the States?
it started in Bali. Well, it started in Japan. We were living in Bali at the time and got the opportunity. And then it expanded out to several countries, mostly in Asia, but we also did some events in Peru, Switzerland.
Cool. Very cool. Do you still do that?
I don't. We ran it for about 10 years. Again, the market changed, as I said, about drug dealing, I guess.
Yeah.
And we weren't as resonant with where it was going for various reasons. We can explore that. I wasn't feeling as connected to the metaphors and such of the yogic teaching. I was interested more in like Native American processes and simpler, closer to the heart, closer to the land stuff. Um, and my wife is Canadian, grew up in Switzerland, but also is from, well, she's Canadian. We lived in BC for 5 years, is my
Cool.
point, over in Nelson.
Beautiful place. Yeah, cool.
Yes, yes. And so, yeah, and then coaching started happening out of that via a very interesting character in my life. Again, I didn't go looking to be a coach, which is just fine, of course. But there was an interesting opportunity that presented itself out of left field, and then slowly I've moved forward into it.
Cool. What was that opportunity? Tell us about that.
It's a good story, at least to me. So, in the late 90s, I was at a meditation retreat in Thailand, and a guy came to teach who was a former monk,
Cool.
American guy. He had been a monk at this monastery, and he was incredibly charismatic and engaging, and the only show in town, right? Silent meditation retreat for 10 days, and here you have this like incredible guy for an hour a day who's like giving these dharma talks. um, and really interesting guy, had been a monk for a total of 5 years in the Tibetan, one of the Tibetan traditions as well as the Thai tradition. Had dropped acid hundreds of times
Cool.
in his life, was a
Cool.
psychologist. And as he put it, he made his living telling rich people that they're assholes because no one else will do it. So I'm like, oh, wow. So there was this like, wow, this guy who's like a link between things that I highly value, if not revere, and
Oh,
this
for
kind of
sure.
alien world of like, oh, really? Because I think rich people are assholes too. And I want to tell them that.
Yeah, I can imagine,
So
like from your background, growing up, the marijuana, the stick it to the man, like being 20, and then all your entire life led to that point. You're like, this guy, holy shit, you can do that? Yeah, that's hilarious.
it really felt magical and kind of transcendent. And then began this long, occasional relationship with this guy where he would like somehow appear magically in my life every few years and, kind of reinforcing this transcendent quality. Finally, and there was some attraction to what he did, but also a lot of aversion. Like, why would you work with all the people in the world? Why would you work with these people? He said, who do the missionaries go to first? I,
Yeah,
I, I don't know who do the mission the people. They go to the people who are doing the most harm, who are most in need of the light. I'm
yeah,
like, oh, cool. So finally, this sort of structure and system and whatever kind of formed around this guy. And at some point, uh, I was visiting him. And let me just say this too. Historically, when I would ask him, he just said, you're not ready. You have too much ego and you haven't owned your suffering.
mm,
I'm not saying you haven't suffered. I'm just saying you haven't owned it. You strut around this world like, don't bother me unless you're having an emergency. And in that case, I'll do everything I can to help you, which was like incredibly insightful. My ego didn't like to hear it, of course,
no,
but I was like, oh, okay. And at one point I visited and he just sort of paused for a moment and he goes, you're finally ready. And, I sort of came on board, as it were.
was that about 6 years ago when you started coaching?
That was about 10 years ago, or maybe a little earlier.
Wow, what a cool life! What a unique life that you've had. Who do you like coaching the most? Do you like coaching you 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Like, who do you connect with most? Who's your ideal client avatar if you had one? I'd love to
Yeah.
hear. Yeah.
You know what? Honestly, I've been trying to get a clearer picture of who that is as of late. last couple of years or so, because even though I love all of my clients, that is the truth. I find a way to love everyone that I'm coaching, because if I didn't, I couldn't coach them well. All the stories fall away, and it's just my heart and my soul and your heart and your soul. That's it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then again, to the degree there's story and there's systems around these people, it's like, this is not what I want to support.
Mm.
You know, this is not what I most highly value in the world. So yes, essentially people like me 10 or 20 years ago, who are spiritual aspirants, who are interested in humanitarian work, philanthropy, altruistic endeavors, yeah, I mean, maybe some, again, very integrity laden business endeavors. Yes, sure, excellent. People that maybe are challenged by the conventions around them, maybe even their inner circle, who buy into it more, bless them, and don't have the kind of support, aren't able to voice how they see things or feel supported and validated in trying to live a different way, because it's hard. It's very, very difficult to live against convention. And as challenging as it is to live within it, within the matrix, in many ways and many levels, on the surface, it's just easy. You know, what's spiritual? You're Catholic. Boom, it works for me. Super. Like, what's something I can do within the system to make money, because you have to make money because we've created this absurd financial system for ourselves. Well, that fits me great. I'll just do this. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad that works for you. I mean, that's where you're at, and that's easier. So to be rebellious for the sake of being rebellious is one thing, but to like conjure up those kinds of energies and various archetypes, in order to move through the world, to be, in it and yet not of it, that takes a special kind of work.
Yes. Yeah. That's why I commend you of your suffering, the poverty, the maybe not growing up in the best place, maybe not getting what you felt like you needed as a child, all, and then that experience with your friends at a young age, and expanding your consciousness, and then doing all those different jobs and being like, none of these, like, what is the point of any of these? What's the point of going to university just to pay off a bunch of debt? Then being a street pharmacist for about 10 or so years, even more, which has led you to this point now, which is really, really, really cool. I can see the threads and how they've all led you here. That's what I find fascinating. Because before this conversation, you're a complete stranger. We connected through a podcasting website, and I just love hearing people's stories, because there's always something to learn. In your years of living on this earth, what do you think, and working with however many clients and probably thousands of people within yoga, and people's stuff comes up when they do yoga, I'm sure. What is the number, maybe the one or two things that you see that most people struggle with? If you could generalize it as like a principle that you could talk to anybody that's listening that maybe is struggling with something, what do you think it is?
I want to add to what I'm going to say next, in all probability, but I want to sit with it.
Yeah.
I want to sort of defer in a way. I want to share something that was shared with me by an elder of the Blackfeet people in North America. The biggest ailments of our age are busyness and self-loathing.
Mm.
And that is also my experience. I could probably add some subcomponents to that, but people are so overstimulated and obligated and going at such a pace, especially younger people, people that are in that generative phase of life. And then along with that, low self-esteem, low self-regard, what sort of dual crosses to carry. And of course, people keep very busy in order to keep away from the raw angst of the self-loathing, right? And vice versa, right? There's a strong relationship there. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
yearning, disconnect. It's always about separation and the ignorance that's behind the separation, not realizing what you truly are enough so that you feel isolated. All the problems come from there. Again, this is not me. This is from many of our traditions, including yoga. But then you see all the neuroticism, all the neediness, all the overcompensation, the defensiveness, all of the isms. It all comes from that.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love that because I call it the real pandemic of humanity. I call it the great pandemic of not enoughness. And it drives all marketing. If you have this iPhone 14, then you're enough. If you have this car, then you're enough. If you have this blonde lady with the big tits and the fake ass, then you're enough. And
Yeah.
it's just being pushed on everybody. And yeah, it just feeds itself. It's like this giant machine, this beast that just is constantly feeding itself. I love what you said though. It's busyness mixed with that because if you're busy all the time, you can't. If you're busy all the time playing in that game, playing in that system, you don't have time. You don't have time to remove yourself from it. Be like, wait a second. These things that I say I need and want that I think that I call it when then syndrome. When I get there, then I'll be happy. When I have children, then I'll be happy. When I this business takes off, then I'll be happy. And then it just keeps getting further and further away. Or when I get these shoes, or when I go on holiday, and it's the society is so busy. It's like that Dalai Lama quote of like what I don't know if you know this quote, but it's like men, like humanity, trade time for health, and then they trade their health for money, and they're always thinking about the future that they live in the present, and some of them are so stuck in the past that they are basically they're never actually here, so they never really live because they're constantly like psychologically somewhere else because of like you said that deep inadequacy that has been put on us since we were very small, plus the busyness of this very high-paced world we live in. Yeah, that's it. I really like the busyness. I only usually just talk about the one side of it, but the busyness is basically like a societal. It's like a societal defense mechanism that we all participate in.
Yes.
That
And
everybody pushes. That the society. That's the culture. It's like a giant cultural defense mechanism to be like, hey, why are we going so fast?
yeah, I like how you put that. How I see that is it's both impersonal because it's just so beyond most people's conscious awareness,
Yeah.
and yet it's also very intentional. There are plenty of people who recognize that's how it is and actively try to keep it that way, because if you're distracted over here by the clown show, then you're not going to see what's really happening and what people are really doing, those that have this need for the illusion of power and try to control humanity, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So that's happening. And then also, speaking of kind of the other half of the equation, lest we get too negative here, what we really are is all of the beauty and power and majesty and magnificence of the universe, which is all power and all beauty and all magnificence, right? And it's not necessarily all or nothing as far as our perception of it. A little bit of light goes a long way. When we can start to shift into like recognizing, you know what? I I am inherently wonderful and beautiful and perfect because I'm an aspect of the all that is. We start engaging with ourselves and the outer world in very, very different ways, very different from what we could call the average or the norm.
Mm. What do you think stops people from, like, they might have that perspective? I've seen a lot of people that they'll go to, like, I've gone to like men's retreats or like retreats that are plant medicine retreats, and I have seen people gain that perspective, but then they stop. Why do you think that is?
Because they're not integrating it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can have the door on the top of your head ripped open, gently open, ripped open, you can have an amazing moment or even a sustained period of transcendence, illumination, all the things we could call it. But then if we don't take that back down through what is sometimes called a current of manifestation. So there's this current of liberation, as it's sometimes called, right? We work through the various survival needs and pleasure centers and all of this into this more expanded realm. But if we don't take what we see and what we connect with and what we realize back down and in through us, all the way into little habits and little emotions. And I'm talking about, I'm going to wash the dishes now, like each cup is a sacred object and I'm honoring it, not like, damn, I have to wash the dishes and then I have to hurry and do this because, you start to walk through life more and more like the whole thing is a ceremony. Ultimately, you're in a shrine, you're born into it, you worship in it the best you can, and when it's time to leave, you do. Really, that's kind of like the bigger picture, or what is possible, right? If you don't do that, it's like, wow, man, that was amazing, cool, and I really see it now. And you go back to your old habits, your old conditioning, the people that reinforce certain things, and it becomes this abstract notion, this experience that you have that is relegated to the realm of experience. And that's cool, but that's it.
I yeah. I just say that the differences between getting to evolving psychologically and evolving your consciousness is the integration. That's why I became an integration coach, because I've seen people transform. I saw a man once that didn't feel really anything. He was very, very closed off. And within 2 days, he felt the immense feeling of love. And I saw this man cry and literally turn from like a very stuck, rigid in his body, kind of blue collar kind of guy, to telling all the guys he loved us. And it was just amazing.
Mm.
And I saw him integrate that. But I say it's like the difference between getting high. You're getting high. Like that's all you're doing if you go to something like that and, like you said, get the door at the top of your head ripped open. You're just getting high versus integrating it. Integrating it is where the real magic, weaving these lessons back into the fabric of your life. Yeah. Do you work with like psychedelic clients? Like, what is your perspective on psychedelics? It's a very buzz in fashion kind of thing right now. Like, there's a lot of people talking about ayahuasca. There's a lot of people, celebrities talking about it. What is your perspective on all of that?
Mm. That's a wonderful question, meaning that I light up being asked it, and a broad one. So, of course, I'll just speak to some aspects of it. Yes, I work with psychedelic clients. The big picture is if humanity is going to survive and or thrive, we need our plant allies.
Yeah. Yep.
And they are making themselves in their own incredibly humble but always powerful way, making themselves more available to us through the avenues and the channels that we have, to give us what we might call a fighting chance. That's how I see it. And of course, that comes with, celebrity endorsements and, these hyper capitalists trying to like change the molecule so they can market. I mean, that's all part of it,
Yeah.
but that's just how we are. But the bigger picture is that they are becoming more accepted, more understood, more available, and therefore more accessible. And they're being utilized more. And it doesn't matter how humanity's limitations engage with them now, because when people start to wake up, they wake up. That's why they've been illegal for so long, because if you wake up and you realize what you've bought into and what's been sold to you and what's still propagated and pervaded by fewer and fewer people who want to control you, the masses wake up. There's nothing the elite are going to be able to do. And this isn't about us and them. This is about just all of us waking up to what we've succumbed to, what we bought into, the limitations that we've accepted, so we can all move forward, move
Yeah.
inward.
Together. Yeah. Beautifully said. I remember The very first time I did LSD was at one of these men's weekends. I was like, oh, I get why this changed culture. I totally like, holy shit. I felt connected to thousands of years of ancestors and this deep, like, synchrony. Like, just, it was, everything was synchronized. It was like all of a sudden that everything came together for a second and I felt it and then it moved. And I just remember this one moment still makes the back of my hair stand up. And I was like, oh, okay, reality is not what I think it is. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment. And yeah, I'm so grateful for all the moments I've had. And but I will say it's not for everybody. A lot of people say if the entire world took mushrooms, everything would be maybe, but there's other paths that I've heard people through fasting. Like one of my friends, Mitch, who I've had on my podcast, he battled serious Crohn's, like serious, like debilitating, almost died. And he heals people through fasting and diets. He's had his fair share of plant medicines, but he mostly does breath work. Big fan of breath work, knows everything about it. He's very into the John DeMartini method, if you've ever heard of him. Very interesting. But yeah, he does it mostly, no psychedelics, nothing, and has helping people really learn that they can heal themselves, especially of really like terminal things like Crohn's or any inflammatory thing in the gut. And it's something I wanted to ask you is I have my own personal experience of healing physical pain with deep inner trauma release, deep inner my nervous system basically is releasing stuff and now the pain in my physical body goes away. What's your experience with that? Because a lot of people just think, oh, I'm not stretching enough, or I need to go get a massage, or I need to go see a doctor. And we have this very Western, like, oh, I just get an elbow in my glutes and they'll release. What's your perspective on that? And what's your own personal experience with that?
Well, on one level, all of those things help, right? These kind of
100%.
external allopathic things, right? And
Yeah.
that might be part of how we attend to all of this. And I think ultimately that yes, there are many paths up the mountain, right? And psychedelics are a very accessible, very powerful way to do it. But so too is fasting or sleep deprivation or all of these things to kind of shift you out of, some kind of contracted state of consciousness. Sure. In the big picture, I think if humanity was living and any given person here that's living in a certain degree of natural attunement, that has a certain degree of mental health and balance or something, then yes, I do think plants are for everybody that is well enough to take them.
Mm,
But there are plenty of people, it's just too much too soon. And then
yes.
it's destabilizing and all of this. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It can be
and it's,
traumatizing.
yes. And then what do we do? What do we do with that trauma, right? Because trauma is just whatever happened that we weren't able to process at the time. So there are various ways to release it. Um, I think there are very specific ways that the nervous system needs to act out, or let go, however you want to put it. Act out probably is not the best to use. And I also think that I could be wrong because, like, my partner and some people I know and respect very deeply are very into somatic experiencing and trauma work, and at really high levels. It's really quite impressive. And I think that we can all find ways to heal and release it, that might be very unique to us. Like, I'll just say, for instance, like ecstatic dance
Oh yeah.
for me is
Oh,
just, it's such freedom. I can just let my body go. And, I've done enough stuff with my body where I have a certain degree of freedom and expression, capability. And I love music. I don't have to adhere to anything, just in the moment and whatever needs to come up. It's a meditation. It gladdens the heart and it lets go of things. It releases pain. So yeah, there are very specific things that are very, very clearly very, very effective and really work, and might fine tune like my own approach and others. But if you have something that allows the essence of that to come through at this point, anyway, I still believe that that's very effective as well.
Yeah. Yeah, like especially the moving the body. I've had my own exploration of that, of like even moving my hips in certain directions, coming across shame. I'm like, oh, what's
Mm.
that? Like moving my hips in a feminine way, like trying to gyrate them in different directions just because it feels good. But also having like coming across shame, like, oh, you're a man, you shouldn't move like that. I'm like, whoa, okay. And experiencing that and then having it release, like big releases. And I'm like, oh, how long has that been there? And I'm like, oh, the shame. I see, like, I have this vision of like that our soul is enmeshed with our nervous system, and it will cause you pain when you're out of alignment with something. So a lot of my clients in deep shame-based depressive states have fibromyalgia, arthritis. They have they've got back surgeries, knee surgeries. They usually maybe overweight, and it's all these things. And I'm like, is it the chicken or the egg? And I think it's both, which is I find very fascinating that the people who are highly traumatized have a lot of physical pain. And I mean, Gabor Mate talks a lot about this, but we just live in a system right now, especially our healthcare system, that is still so far behind, that separates the mind and the body. And like, why don't our doctors talk about diet? Like, you go in there, you're like, yeah, I'm just feeling depressed. Hey, like, what do you eat? I just eat for breakfast. I have a vape and a nice coffee, and then I don't eat for the rest of the day. It's like, well, maybe you're not depressed. Maybe you should have a good diet. Yeah, it's fascinating. What's the uh what's the number one thing that you think people can work on in the immediate if they're maybe in a state of suffering that is maybe just, I don't like the word tool or trick because it is going to take a long time. It is, you're going to change, you're going to have to come across yourself, but maybe something that you like or a unique tool to you that you find really effective that you'd be open to sharing.
It's not unique to me. It's something everyone that is alive can practice. Slow down,
Mm.
pause. If you need to or feel inclined to, and you can, stop, breathe, breathe. Take the breath in, watch it, see what's moving, see what's not moving, see what's letting go, see what's not letting go. As simple as that. That practiced well, regularly, by enough people would change the world.
There's no doubt in my mind about that. We're so busy being busy. We're on this treadmill that isn't going anywhere. It's like get off the treadmill.
And you see it reflected in all kinds of ways all the time
Yeah.
in the world.
I think it's making us sick. It's making our society sick. And we're not, like, even just like the lighting or like just like a lot of people that like they have anxiety and like they label themselves anxiety. I just wonder, and they live in like a big city. If you go out into the forest and just sit there, you're like, oh, I just feel so much better. It's like, yeah, because there's not ambulances and police and thousands of people everywhere and the crosswalk sign going off and somebody getting angry in traffic and beeping all at the same time. And you live there. You live in that for years. And you're like, yeah, it's pretty high strung. It's my job. It's my mom. It's like maybe it's that, but maybe it's the environment that you are choosing to put yourself in that your nervous system is like, whoa. Yeah, as I get older, I'm 31. So I'm born in 1992. The older I get, the more peace I want. I don't want the fast pace crap anymore. It's just, it was fun when I was younger, but not anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think cities are best suited for young people for a variety of reasons. And then there's just a natural inclination to slow things down, different prioritizing that happens when we get older, even for the less than fully conscious among us.
Mm.
And the reason that I didn't mention nature before is because for some people, for all too many people in this world, nature isn't immediately accessible. I mean, I think when you have enough time spent in, uh, some kind of complete ecosystem, then you can take the essence of that into, say, a city park and just sit under a tree, and you know how to speak to it and with it. You know how to listen. You can commune with it, in other words. But a lot of people, they don't have that. So what we all have is the ability to consciously at least attempt to slow down, to pause, to stop even for a moment or two, and to breathe.
Yeah. That's my friend's Mitch, who I'd mentioned before. That's his message. He's like, just like, you're here. You're back. Like, that's all you'll ever be. The future doesn't exist. The past doesn't exist. That right there. That's the. Imagine if everything we were looking for, all the searching for thousands of years of God and everything was just that. And I think that actually that is the actual secret. That is it. Like, nope, can't be that simple. Let's go to Mars. Let's find it out there. It's like, oh, what if our consciousness was just evolving and it was there the whole time and we just missed it. It was
That
just
is the truth.
I
It
think
has been outside of time,
yeah.
so always in the present,
Yeah.
and our breath on the level of microcosm, very, very powerful. But if we expand your idea into the bigger picture, we attune to the flow of life, the pulse of the universe. It's essentially a big bang. It's coming from a moment of stillness and potential. It expands, the universe flows outward. There's a brief pause and it comes back together for all eternity. That's going on again in the microcosm of our bodies.
Holy shit.
I've taken a lot of acid. Did I mention that?
Yeah. But it's true. Like I have deep, like I had this vision the other day when I was smoking some marijuana and I was at the gym and I was on a bike and I was on a treadmill, like a stationary bike, talking to my mum. And I imagine that our lives is just like, you ever seen a drop of water fall into a still water and then it goes down and it bounces back up and then the drop comes back up. And I just kind of thought that the drop coming back up is like us being born. And then we leave that for a second and we get to experience what that's like. And then just like Rumi's quote, I'm not a drop in the ocean, I'm the entire ocean in a drop. We return back down and then the ocean of consciousness or souls or whatever you want to say is like, okay, that's what Troy's life was like. Okay, cool. And you shed the water, you shed the surface tension, which was around that little droplet, which was your ego, your identity, who you believed you are. And I had this download on the phone with my mom at the gym while I'm on a bike, and I was like, shit, okay, like that's and I've felt that and I've seen that, and we are all connected, and the more and like there's just so much stuff going on in the world. There's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's Trump, there's Biden, there's Ukraine, there's Russia, there's China, there's Taiwan, there's now Palestine and Israel, and we keep repeating the same lessons as a culture, as a species, and just see that we're just hurting ourselves. We just keep hurting ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves.
Self-loathing
Mm.
on a large scale, self-flagellation, right? We believe that, well, there's always been war. We need to keep having war. I'm right and you're wrong. That's what keeps this going. And I know all too well how it looks like the same old story. I know the despair that can come with that, all of it. And it's never quite the same.
No.
It is wearing thin. more and more people, and you led with this, more and more people are waking up.
Yes.
The way of being is not sustainable. Evolve or die. It's going to happen. So we will either evolve pretty rapidly, pretty rapidly and pretty massively, or we're going to die out.
I know. That's why I think it's funny when people are like, we're destroying the planet. I'm like, no, we're not. We could destroy the planet 300 million years from now. The planet is fine. It's totally fine. We probably ruined it for we have the capacity to ruin it for 20, 30, 100 million years if we really have a nuclear war and just mess it up. But eventually, we're not actually destroying the planet. The rock we're on will be okay without us. We're destroying ourselves. We are hurting ourselves, and we are hurting all the species that inhabit this planet with us right now. So yes, we are hurting the planet, but I think the planet would be okay without us eventually. If we didn't exist, one day that got wiped out. And we just have to ask ourselves, do we want to evolve, like you said, or do we want to cease to exist? Because we're on a path that it's like I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's called, what's it called? It's by a guy called Jamie Wheel, and it's called Recapture the Rapture. And he has this concept, which is basically that we're coming across meaning 3.0. Meaning 1.0 was around for 2,000 years. It's you're saved or you're not. Religion. Like you're either saved or you're not. Pretty simple. It's like, okay, you either believe you're saved or you're not. Then in the 19th, 20th century, liberalism came along where it's like, hey, let's include everybody. Like, let's include everybody. That's meaning 2.0. He said, well, that hasn't really worked out either because there's more people on antidepressant than ever and more anxiety and more fear. And say there's more slaves in the world than there ever has been because of whatever. Now it's time for meaning 3.0. And he talks about all the stuff we're talking about, working with a coach like Troy, like and being like, hey, why do I feel this way? And having somebody and finding tools to regulate your own nervous system. Because when you can do that, then you can help other people around you and then that's how we create meaning 3.0, but it's an individual thing. It's not a top down thing, it's a bottom up kind of thing. And I find that book very fascinating. And it's basically what we're talking about. And he said that like the clock's about to strike midnight. It's like 1 second to go. We're on the brink of something, either our destruction or our evolution, and you choose.
I love this idea that we keep touching on. It is our choice. You know, aliens are not going to save us. Jesus is not going to come back, although the Christ consciousness and essence is what's going to need to arise if we do save ourselves. I want to circle back in defense of my eco warrior friends who might push back against your description.
Oh, yeah.
It's not untrue. And I think the peril there is to get in our heads and remove ourselves from the enormous trauma and suffering and pain and crying out that the earth is doing right now, is expressing right now. She is in agony.
Yes.
She is in agony and she's screaming out for help at one level. In the biggest picture, yes, that's a whole different thing. But the peril is to engage in spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity or something there. So just want to honor that perspective.
100%. Yes, you can zoom out so far that nothing matters if you really want.
Yes. And that's a way to disassociate. It's a way to it's a way to deal with trauma that is not effective, that keeps it locked in, but it's very attractive to many people, especially who are just coming on to a non-conventional spiritual path or something, right? There are a lot of top-heavy spiritual people in the world who haven't dealt with the lower chakras, you might say, because it's just too painful. And as soon as you had a chance to like get out of there, you got out of there. You didn't, go back to clean up the mess yet, and you certainly didn't stay around to do it before you moved on, right? And this is not at all uncommon. In fact, quite common.
Yeah. When I was saying it, I was like, it is true, but you see I've felt it. I've felt the earth breathing before, and I felt it, and I was lying, and I was like, oh. And I felt a deep connection with the earth that it is a it's a being. That's why the first Avatar movie hit everybody's soul. That's why it did. That's why it got everybody, because they're like, there's something about that movie that's like, oh, like that, how they connect their hair to the tree, and how they can feel the planet they're on. They can feel Pandora. First Nations people all over the planet have been doing that for a very long time, except we're like, listen, you guys don't have guns. You guys think that somebody flies across the sky when it's actually the sun and it's 2 million light years away or whatever. So you're stupid. And my journey has been on has been like, oh, they actually have such deep wisdom that we need to listen. Going back to what you said, what that man said to you about the busyness and the self-loathing, like there's more of that wisdom that they can share with us. Like,
oh yes. Oh yes.
It's bottomless, but none of this fast-paced society that we live in kind of wants to listen to it. It's all about progress, and we live in a debt-laden economy that just keeps, like, for my day job, I sell vehicles, right? I sell vehicles to people, and I finance banks and loans and everything. And I see the system I'm part of. I'm like, this cannot last. Like, it's just a giant debt bubble, and every country owes money to every other country. I'm like, who do these countries owe each? Like, what is going on? Like, China owes the $1 trillion to the States, but then somehow the States owes 200 billion to China. I'm like, what is, like, and it would never end. But that's all big picture thinking. It's like, how do we as an individual, going back to what you said, pick that breath, because you can get very up there in the clouds. And I have a tendency to do that sometimes, if you can't tell.
A lot of us do,
Yeah.
and men tend to have more of a than women, who for various reasons have things that actually connect them to the earth and their hearts and their souls more.
Yeah. We've been going a while. I could literally talk to you for hours on end because I love this kind of conversation.
Likewise.
We might do a second episode at some point, because I'd love to have you back on and talk, because there's so many topics we could talk about. For those of you listening, where can they follow you? Are you on social media? Where's the best place to connect with you?
I am not on social media, no judgment.
That's fine.
And you can go to my website, Wisdom Warrior Coaching, and it's all there, or at least a lot of it is there.
Yeah. Well, if something resonated with anybody listening to this, and you want to work with Troy, because I'm sure somebody is listening to this and be like, I've sold marijuana for 10 years. Or, like, who knows what it'd be? Or I lived in Thailand for a bit, and I've traveled the world, and I want to be a humanitarian. I like what this guy's about. Go to his website, because he could be the perfect coach for you to help you look inwards and find your own healing. And that's what this is all about. That's why I have people like you on the podcast. That's why I do this podcast, and that's why I started it, because I just love having conversations with people about things like this, that is a complete stranger, literally as far as possible as you can get from me. If you drew a line through the planet, I'd probably hit right where you are from where I am. I'm originally from Perth, Western Australia, which is not actually too far from you. And it's very far away. It's a long way to get there. It's 21 hours of flying from where I am. And we are connecting like this, and you are making your own ripple in the world. And those of you who are listening, that's what this is all about. That's what this podcast is about. If you've made it this far, go look up Troy, go look up his work, go read his about section. And I'm sure you're doing other podcasts. So there's other podcasts that you're probably going on, because you're on the Pod Match. So you're probably going on other podcasts. So do you have a list of podcasts on your website? Like, how could people find you with the podcasts you've done?
It's in my blog. Every so often I'll put up the new podcast. That said, I have been able to be as open and honest and comprehensive with my life story as I've ever been during our time together right now. And I so appreciate that. It feels joyous and liberating.
Well, it's a great story. It's your story. And I always tell people, if you want to build a business or build anything, your greatest asset is you. It's your story. Like your story is, you could make a movie out of it. Like really, like you could make it would be like you could maybe Hollywood it, make it a bit more crazy. You're like you're watching it, you're like that never happens. Like shut up, man, it's the movie. Like, but you could, and it's a very
The honest truth is, I don't think you would need to exaggerate. You could tell the story verbatim, and it would be Hollywood enough.
yeah, exactly, yeah, exactly. Because I don't know the details. There's only so much you could talk about. But you've traveled around the world, you've seen different cultures. Who knows what you've seen? And we didn't even touch on that. We can touch on that next time of like what traveling does to somebody's consciousness, which is huge. And seeing deep poverty for the first time and how that is such a visceral experience. And we can talk about all of that next time. But for now, let's wrap it up. Go follow, or you can't follow Troy, but go follow his website. Maybe you have an email list or a blog or things you're posting. Check in from time to time. And maybe one day Troy will bring his gifts to social media. Maybe not. Who knows? It would be very cool. But thank you for being on the show, Troy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, brother.